The morning they showed up at my office, I was wearing my good blazer, the charcoal one I'd bought to celebrate signing my first major client, and I was holding a glass of sparkling water, watching the Toronto skyline from the 23rd floor like I'd earned every inch of that view. Because I had. I didn't hear the elevator. I didn't hear the receptionist hesitate. I just turned around and there they were. My father, in his good coat. The one he only wore to things he considered important. And my mother standing slightly behind him the way she always did when she wanted to pretend she wasn't involved in whatever he was about to do. My brother was there too. Of course he was. I want to be very precise about what happened next, because the version my father would tell you is completely different from the truth. He would tell you he came to celebrate with me. That he was proud. That it was a surprise visit from a loving family who had simply lost touch. What actually happened is that he walked past my receptionist without stopping, crossed my office, looked around at the glass and the city and the framed contracts on the wall, and said, "Good. You've done well enough. We need to talk about your brother." That's it. No hello. No hug. No acknowledgement that the last time we'd spoken, he'd told me I was making a mistake leaving the family business, and that if I walked out that door, I shouldn't expect anything from them ever again. I had walked out that door 18 months ago. 18 months of silence, so complete I'd started to think of myself as someone who simply didn't have parents. It hurt less that way. Let me back up. My father ran a mid-sized landscaping company in Mississauga for 30 years. When I was 22, fresh out of my business administration degree at Ryerson, he asked me to come work for him. Not as an offer, more like an assumption. You're done school. You come work for the family. That's how it worked. I came. I spent 4 years reorganizing his accounting, dragging his invoicing system into the current decade, building relationships with commercial clients he'd never thought to pursue. The company grew. Revenue almost doubled. I never once got a raise above what he'd started me at, because family doesn't negotiate with family. I never got a title change. I never got credit in any of the meetings where my ideas were presented as his. My brother, meanwhile, worked there too, technically. He came in around 10, left by 3, spent most of his time on his phone, and was paid 30% more than me because he was the son. My father's reasoning, stated plainly and without embarrassment, was that my brother would one day take over the company, so his compensation reflected his future role. My role, apparently, was to make that future possible while staying invisible. The breaking point wasn't dramatic. It was a Tuesday in February. I'd stayed late to prepare a proposal for a new corporate contract, a property management company with 12 buildings across the GTA. I came in the next morning to find my father had met with them the previous evening, presented my proposal, and introduced my brother as the one who developed it. My brother didn't even know the client's name. I cleaned out my desk that same afternoon. My father stood in the doorway and told me I was being emotional. My mother said nothing. My brother looked at his phone. The next 18 months were the most clarifying of my life. I'd been saving quietly for 2 years. I'm a numbers person, that's just what I do, and I had enough to get a sublease on a small office in Etobicoke and 6 months of runway. I took 3 clients with me, businesses I'd personally brought in who had no particular loyalty to my father's name. Within 8 months, I had 12 clients. Within 14 months, I had enough to hire 2 full-time employees and move to a proper office downtown. I didn't tell my family any of this. They hadn't asked. The morning they showed up, I had just signed a contract with a property development firm that would make my company profitable for the next 3 years without a single additional client. It was the kind of deal that changes what's possible. I was still holding the pen when my receptionist buzzed to tell me there were visitors. I told her to send them in because I assumed it was the client's team coming back with a question. I had not, in any version of reality I could have imagined, expected to turn around and see my father. "Good. You've done well enough. We need to talk about your brother." I set down my glass. I did not hug him. I did not hug my mother. I looked at my brother, who was staring at the floor in that particular way he had when he knew he'd done something and was hoping someone else would absorb the consequences. "You could have called," I said. "You would have said no," my father said. And at least that was honest. He sat down without being invited. My mother perched on the edge of the chair beside him. My brother stayed standing near the door, which I noted. Here's what my father explained to me over the next 20 minutes, in the tone he used when he believed he was being completely reasonable. My brother had spent the past year trying to open a restaurant. He had rented a space in Oakville, hired a contractor, purchased equipment. He had done this without a complete business plan, without adequate capital, and, crucially, without telling anyone in the family until the contractor was already 6 weeks into a renovation. He had funded the initial phase with a personal line of credit and 2 credit cards. The renovation had gone over budget. The equipment financing had fallen through. He now owed approximately $94,000 across various creditors. The renovation was stalled, and the landlord was threatening to sue for breach of lease. He needs someone to co-sign a loan, my father said. The bank won't approve him on his own. I looked at my brother. Did you know I was here? I asked him directly. Did you know what I built? He shrugged in the way that meant yes. How long? Few months, he said. So he had known for months. He said so. He had known for months. He'd said nothing. None of them had said anything. No call, no text, not a word, until the moment they needed something specific from me. I thought about the proposal. The one I'd made, the one he'd taken credit for, the one that had been the last nail. I thought about 4 years of 70-hour weeks and being introduced as my father's assistant at my own client meetings. I thought about the February Tuesday and the look on my father's face when I packed my things, like I was being unreasonable, like I was the problem. I'm not co-signing anything, I said. My father's expression shifted, not to anger, not yet, to calculation. I'd seen that look before. You realize what happens to him if this falls through, he said. He loses everything. His credit is destroyed. He may have to declare personal bankruptcy. Is that what you want for your brother? What I want, I said slowly, is to understand why his financial decisions are my responsibility. Because you're family. You didn't feel that way 18 months ago. My mother made a small sound. My father ignored it. That was a disagreement. This is a crisis. Those are different things. I almost laughed. A disagreement. He'd told me not to expect anything from them if I left. He'd meant it as a threat. It had turned out to be the most useful thing he'd ever said to me. I built this, I said, and I meant the office, the contracts on the wall, the view, all of it, without any help from you, without any acknowledgement from you. I want you to understand that clearly before this conversation goes any further. No one is disputing that, my father said, which was itself a kind of acknowledgement I hadn't expected. Good, I said. Then you understand that I also built it without incurring $94,000 in unsecured debt on a business idea I hadn't properly researched. My brother said, "That's not fair," from the door. You're right, I said. It's not. None of this is fair. That's actually my whole point. My father leaned forward. And then he did the thing. The thing I had known was coming from the moment I turned around and saw them standing there, because he had always done this. His whole life, whenever logic failed him, he appealed to obligation. He told me that he had given me everything, that he had paid for my education, which was partially true. He had contributed to an respoc that covered about a third of my tuition. My grandmother's inheritance covered another third, and I had taken a student loan for the rest. He told me I had learned everything I knew from working at his company, which was so spectacularly backwards that I had to press my hand flat against my desk to stay seated. He told me that family took care of family, that I was sitting in a fancy office acting like I hadn't grown up in the same house as my brother, and didn't I have any loyalty left at all? I let him finish. There was a silence. I want to show you something, I said. I opened my laptop and turned it so he could see the screen. It was a spreadsheet, not a dramatic one, just the kind of thing I build automatically when I'm thinking through a problem. I'd started it about 3 months after I left, when I was trying to make sense of my own financial history. This is what I estimate I contributed to your company over 4 years, I said. Revenue I brought in, contracts I sourced, operational savings from the systems I implemented. This is what I was paid. This is the difference. The number in the gap column was $218,000. Conservative estimate. I'd been careful to only include things I could document. My father stared at the screen. My mother leaned over to look. My brother still hadn't moved from the door. "That's not how business works," my father said finally. "It's exactly how business works," I said. "You just didn't apply it to me." Another silence. Longer this time. Here is the thing about my father. He is not a stupid man. He is a proud man, which is different. And pride had always made him slower than he could have been. I watched him working through it, the number, what it meant, what it implied about the last 4 years, and I watched him decide, the way he always decided, that the way forward was to push harder rather than reconsider. "That's in the past," he said. "What matters now is your brother. $94,000 is not an insurmountable amount for you. You're signing million-dollar contracts." "One contract," I said. "And it's not mine to use as collateral for someone else's debt." "Then just co-sign. You wouldn't even have to pay anything. He'll make the payments." If he could make the payments, the bank would have approved him. The logic landed, and my father didn't have an answer for it. My mother put her hand on his arm. My brother looked up for the first time. "I told them not to come here," my brother said quietly. "I told them you wouldn't want this." Something in that surprised me. I looked at him more carefully. He looked, I realized, genuinely miserable. Not the performed misery of someone trying to get something, just tired and ashamed and a bit lost. He'd always been the favorite, which had never actually helped him learn to be competent. I understood that in the abstract. It didn't change my answer. "I know you did," I said, and I meant it. I looked at my father. "I'm not co-signing alone. That's final. But I will tell you what I'm willing to do, and you should listen carefully because I'm only going to say it once." He waited. "I know a commercial insolvency consultant. She works with small businesses in exactly this situation. I'll pay for an initial consultation, 2 hours, and she'll tell you what the actual options are. Not what a bank will or won't do, but what the real path forward looks like. Whether that's a restructured payment plan, a negotiated settlement with the contractor, an assignment in bankruptcy, whatever makes actual sense. That's what I'll give you." "That's it?" my father said. "That's it." He stood up. He said that he had expected more from me. He said that when things had been hard for our family, when the company had a bad year, when the van needed replacing, when the roof had to be redone, we hadn't had the luxury of just writing a check for a consultant. We'd figured it out together. "I know," I said. "I was there for all of that. I just wasn't given credit for any of it." He left. My mother paused at the door. She almost said something. I could see it in her face, and then followed him. My brother was last. He stopped and turned. "The restaurant was a good idea," he said. "I just did it wrong." "Probably," I agreed. "That's what the consultant will help you figure out." He nodded. He looked like he wanted to say something else. Then he left. I stood alone in my office for a long moment. The Toronto skyline was doing what it always did, indifferent and enormous. I looked at the contract on my desk, the one I'd just signed, the one that had changed what was possible, and I thought about the version of me who had packed a box on a Tuesday in February and walked out of a job she had made worth having. And I felt something that wasn't quite pride and wasn't quite grief, but was somewhere in between. My phone buzzed. My accountant. I'd texted her while my father was talking under the desk, because I am thorough and I had already been thinking. Her message said, "Already looked into it. There's actually an interesting angle here if he goes the BIA proposal route. I can pull the file on the Oakville contractor. If there were deficiencies in the work, that changes the picture." Worth knowing before the consultation. I had asked her to look into this not because I intended to bail my brother out, but because I am the kind of person who wants to understand all the variables. And because, and I'm being honest here, even though it makes me sound more complicated than I'd like, I did not actually want my brother to lose everything. I wanted my father to understand what he'd done, and what I'd built, and why those were related. Those are different things. 2 weeks later, my brother called me. First time in 18 months. He'd taken the consultation. He hadn't brought my father. The consultant had told him that with the right restructuring, the business could still be viable, but he'd have to negotiate with the contractor about the deficiencies, settle with two of the creditors directly, and find a co-investor rather than a co-signer, someone with an actual stake, not just a guarantee. He asked me if I knew anyone. I didn't answer right away. I let him sit with the question. "Tell me the actual plan," I finally said. "Not what you hoped it would be, what you've got now, what's salvageable, what it would realistically take." He talked for 45 minutes. It wasn't polished, there were gaps, but there was also, underneath the financial mess and the bruised pride, something that was actually interesting. He had, it turned out, spent 3 months researching a very specific niche, catering to the growing number of corporate clients in Oakville and Burlington who needed recurring, high-quality lunch and event service, not a restaurant. A contracted catering operation using the kitchen space he'd already built out. It was not the worst idea I'd ever heard. I told him so. "Is that a yes?" he asked. "That's a maybe," I said. "Send me the numbers, real ones, and get the consultant to put the restructuring timeline in writing." He did. It took him 3 weeks. The numbers were imperfect, but not dishonest, which was more than I had expected. I did not invest because he was my brother. I invested because the projected returns were reasonable, the risk was bounded, and I had structured it, with my accountant's help, as a secured loan at market rate, with a personal guarantee from my brother against his share of the eventual sale, if there was one. No favoritism, no family discount. Every clause written out and signed. My father called when he heard. "I knew you'd come through," he said, as if that was what had happened. "I made a business decision," I said. "I need you to understand those are different things." He was quiet for a moment. "Your mother wants to know if you'll come for dinner." I thought about the silk blouse I'd bought myself the day the first big client signed. I thought about February. I thought about my brother on the phone, going through 45 minutes of genuine reckoning, asking for help in a way that was actually honest. "Tell her I'll think about it," I said. And for the first time in a long time, I meant it as something other than a no. The restaurant, the catering company technically, opened in Oakville on a Thursday in October. My brother sent me a photo of the first event. 50 corporate lunches, every container labeled, every order right. He looked exhausted and proud, in the way that only comes from doing something hard correctly. I did not go to the opening. I had a client meeting, but I saved the photo. I keep coming back to that spreadsheet, the one I turned to face my father across my own desk. Teen-handed $18,000 in a single cell. 4 years of my life distilled into a number he had never once thought to calculate. Not because he was cruel, exactly, but because it had never occurred to him to look. That's the thing about how we're raised to think about family and money and obligation. We're taught that love is unconditional, which is true. But somewhere along the way that gets tangled up with the idea that loyalty means absorbing whatever someone else refuses to carry. My father genuinely believed he was asking me for something reasonable. That's what makes it hard. It wasn't malice. It was a complete absence of accounting, moral accounting, the kind where you sit down and honestly ask, what have I taken, what have I given, and have I been square with the people around me? He hadn't been square with me, and because he'd never done that reckoning himself, he couldn't understand why I had. I think about my brother a lot too. He'd known about my company for months and said nothing. And yet, when it mattered, he was the one who said I told them not to come here. There's something in that worth paying attention to. He knew it was wrong. He just hadn't figured out yet how to be the person who acts on what he knows is right, rather than the person who goes along because going along is easier. That's its own kind of work. It takes time. Some people never get there. What I've learned, slowly and sometimes the hard way, is that integrity isn't something you perform once under pressure. It's built in small decisions over years, mostly when no one's watching. Every time I stayed late on a proposal that would get credited to someone else, I told myself I was being loyal. I was wrong. I was being complicit in my own erasure. The honest version of loyalty would have been to name what was happening and refuse to participate in it. I didn't know how to do that then. I do now. And the intelligence piece, the spreadsheet, the accountant on speed dial, the structured loan with my brother instead of an open-ended cosign. None of that was brilliance. It was just the discipline of understanding my situation clearly, without the fog of guilt or obligation distorting the numbers. Clarity is something you practice. You get better at it the more honest you're willing to be with yourself about what's actually happening versus what you wish were happening. The hardest part was the 18 months alone, building something without any acknowledgement from the people who were supposed to care whether you succeeded. That required a kind of endurance I didn't know I had until I needed it. The ability to keep going, not because someone was watching, not because someone was proud, but because the work itself was worth doing and the life I was building was mine. My brother sent me a photo of 50 boxed lunches on a Thursday in October. I saved it. Not because I'd forgiven everything, or because the accounting between us was suddenly settled, but because something real had happened. He had done something hard and done it right, and that deserved to be acknowledged. That's what I'm trying to hold on to, that the point was never punishment, the point was clarity. And once you have that, you get to decide what you build with it.